Hi everyone. Let me figure out how this was. We're going to talk analytics and the importance of traceability and observability in mobile. It's a really boring title, but it doesn't have to be a boring topic. This was my sort of more interesting title. So you've released an app. Now what? And this all came out of, we were talking about, we all know how to get apps built, coding them and stuff, but how do you get them into production? And then once you've got it into production, then what? How do you know? So we're going to talk a few things, what the problem is, we talk about analytics, talk about alerting and monitoring, and then finally, time for any questions. So what is the problem? Well, if everything's going great, there isn't a problem, but the thing is, how do you know that everything's going great? How do you know how many people are using your app? Are they enjoying it? Are they hating your app? These are some of the big things that you could be asked. So one of the big things you could look at is ratings. On the one hand, ratings are pretty great. They tell us whether we're liking the app. They tell us, how we can move up in visibility. They might give us some good feedback to tell us, you need to do this, you need to do that. On the other hand, well, they're not so great. They're pretty terrible. They only rate things when things go wrong. People don't rate things when they've got a load of nice things to say about you. And when they do hate your app, they write a hell of a lot. And they write more when they want to complain. So, and the other thing is people don't tend to go back and re-rate your app. They come and give you a 1 star and say, this thing's terrible, this goes wrong. You go, all right, okay, I'll fix it. They don't come back and give you 5 stars. So how many times have you seen stuff like this? Your 5 stars, I love it and it's fun. Thanks, very useful. I love to play this game because of its realistic graphics. Again, really, really useful, really insightful there, 5 stars. Or 1 star, I love this app. 1 star, so nice, it's wonderful, very inspiring, nice, 1 star. It's useless. It's less than useless. It just doesn't tell you anything. So there's got to be better ways, and yeah, there is. It's analytics. What is it? It's all that boring stuff. The product owners always banging on about getting your analytics in. They want to know what they want you to do. Adding how many users we're going to have, how many people are using the app, how much money are they making. They want to answer all those awkward questions. How many users have you got logged on? How many people have opened it? Where are users failing? How do users behave differently? What are your demographics like? What are the most popular features and journeys? And it can be difficult to answer those questions. So that's where we have to use analytics. And there's basic stuff you can get out in the Play Store or in the App Store, and that can tell you, how many people have installed your app, how many times it's been opened. It can tell you things about, how slow, how fast it is. So you can see, how many active sessions per device, things like that. I've stolen some of these from some of the and stores. But there are better tools. So things like Google Analytics, Firebase, Adobe Analytics, Mixpanel, and tons of different tools that you can use. And they all integrate with various popular frameworks, so your native, Flutter, React Native, as well as having non-mobile web, so you can see how you compare to web journeys. How are more people using your app than the regular website? And they all have SDKs, so it'll do a lot of the stuff for you automatically. You can just throw your SDK into your app and boom, away. Analytics, there you go. But it's not as simple as that. It's never that simple. So you might need to do a little bit of extra work. And yeah, logging myself. But actually, it's really not that difficult. It's a couple of lines. We can just, for Firebase, you just throw in an await and say, log this event. Great, jobs are good, and there it goes into your analytics tool. And you can throw it to the analytics team and say, you go and sort it out. Adobe Experience, you just send an event. Mixpanel, you just send an event. You're just tracking. But what do I need to track? You know, that's the key thing. It's the eternal question that you get. You tend to get your product owners or people or business to say, well, you say, what do you want me to track? And, well, what can you provide? And it's like, well, I can provide anything you want. You know, tell me what you want. And, but what can you give me? You know, what do you want to track? What can we track? You know, it goes round and round and round and round. And I often thinking about it in terms of metrics like this. Oh, I can track button clicks. I can track key presses. That's it's the wrong way. You know, you're thinking kind of bottom up. I think sometimes you really need to think top down. So this is where you turn it on its head. And we say, right, okay, if we don't need to track it, don't track it. There's no point tracking, every single key press that somebody puts in. And you may not want to track every single key press because there might be personal information. You know, if you're doing a banking app, you don't want to know what everybody's account numbers are. Instead, work out what questions you're trying to answer. You talk to your product teams, talk to your analyst teams to say, well, what are you actually trying to answer? What questions are you trying to get? You know, are they wanting how many users are using the app? How many users have logged in? How many users have made a payment? How many users are looking at a particular pair of trainers? So you can do that and then think about what you would actually need to track to get that. So it might be, let's say, you know, login. Well, how many people reach a particular screen? So at that point, I can track and say, right, okay, this screen's loaded. But conversely, think of the negative of that. You know, if they say, well, I want to know how many users have logged in. Well, actually, you might want to also think about how many users have failed to log in, because that can be just as important, because it could tell you there's a problem somewhere. And if you're not tracking that, you'll never know until your App Store ratings are 1 star, brilliant. And give yourself room. You know, don't back yourself into a corner. Give yourself room to make this expandable, extensible. So, but there's other things. You are tracking people, so you need to be a good tracking citizen. Once you start tracking a user, you probably need to tell them. Depends what it's for, but you often need to tell the user you're tracking them, because data privacy laws, certainly in this country, you may be store policies, privacy policies, going through Apple's app tracking transparency. It's always a difficult one to say, that one. And depending on what you're tracking, there are different categories for things you're tracking. So analytics for advertising is very different for analytics to understanding how users are using an app, or analytics for understanding if your app is on its knees crying in a corner. And yeah, the policies are all up. They're easy to find. They're all on the websites. You can't go far without finding one. So, but you might be thinking, well, I'm a dev. I don't care about what users are doing. I'm just here to build what people tell me to build. But really, if you're a dev, ask yourself this question. And this is a question I use in interviews as well when I'm interviewing people. If your app was released and people are coming to you saying, it's always crashing, it's constantly crashing, what would you do? So this is where we come on to the second half of this, alerting and monitoring. And the response I usually get is, well, I'd look at logs. You know, apps crashing, I'd look at logs. So how do you get them? How do you get the logs? You know, you've not got the customer's device. You can't go and say, dear Mr. Customer, I've heard your app's crashing. Can I have the phone for you? You can't buy them a new phone, although I have been to a place where we had a couple of people who constantly had problems, and we did just buy them new phones. It was easier than fixing it. And the logs, they might be obfuscated. You're in production, so hopefully you're minifying, obfuscating all your code. So you get, even if you got these logs, junk, you know, and it might not tell you anything. So you need to understand, well, how do I replicate it? You know, if I'm going to fix it, I need to prove it. So I need to understand how this happened, what was going on. So how can you replicate it in test? And also, how big of a problem is it? You know, if it's just little Timmy, who every time he hammers on the login button 10 times, the app crashes. Well, that's one thing. You tell Timmy, don't stop hammering on the login button, you know. But actually, if it's everybody who gets to a particular page, their phone explodes, well, that's a big problem. That's a big problem, especially if you're on a plane. So there's got to be a better way. And again, it's essentially analytics. So for dealing with crashes, problems, Google's and Apple's tools, you know, the App Store and the Play Store will give you some information. It's there. It's okay. It's not detailed if you've got a large complex app. If you've got a relatively small app, you probably can get away with it. But you need a bigger solution for larger problems. So there's things like Firebase, Crashlytics, that's built into Firebase, so you can integrate that. Again, these will all have SDKs that you can integrate with your app. App Dynamics, Dynatrace, New Relic, Splunk, Datadog, Sentry, they're all much of a muchness. They all do very similar things. And again, you know what you need to do. Monitoring, they just give you an SDK that you integrate, so you just drop it in. You might have to do a bit of work if you're using something completely, you know, random off the wall. If you've decided, you know what, I don't want to use React Native, I'm a Links guy now. I don't think anybody's doing that, but you'll figure it out. And again, it'll instrument your app. And this will mean that button presses, screen loads, maybe text fields, things like that, some of it gets automatically done. Some of it you'll have to do yourself though again. They'll detect crashes, ANRs. They'll usually give you a nice interface. They'll also give you the option usually to upload your mappings and your DSIMs so that you can actually deobfuscate your logs and actually see what was going on. They'll often leave you able to log extra information. So you can, if you know that you've got a particular problem area, you can essentially start leaving breadcrumbs. So you can start to work out what the users are actually doing before they get to a particular page. And it's usually advisable to integrate this with your other analytics so that you can understand from the product side as well as from the crashing side. And if you do it in the same place, it's just the same tool and you know that you've not missed something. If you tell it to track an event, goes off to that one, goes off to that one. So what benefits do you get out of it? Alerts. You can get alerts for your crashes. Response times, if you find your app, you know, usually responds within 0.3 seconds and suddenly it starts responding in 10, 20 seconds. Get emails, get phone calls, usually at 3 a.m. Usually it's not your fault because some API has gone down, but it means that when people are complaining to you, you can tell them, well, it's not my problem. I can see through my tools, this API is not responding. Get them on the phone. You can link a lot of these tools let you link crashes together. So if you get similar crashes, you can link them all into one big incident so it keeps everything together so you're not trying to wade through 10, 20, 30,000 different crashes, depending on how bad it is. I say you can look at sessions. There are some tools out there that let you record. So, you know, Hotjar is one that's used on the web. I think there are similar ones for mobile as well. But if you've left breadcrumbs, you can usually go, there's my crash. I can see what it is that the user's done. So maybe they were on this page, they click this button, they click the button. You know, little Timmy's hammering login again. I told his mom to stop him doing that. And the other big thing, the whole picture. The whole picture is so important. If you're in a large, complex system where you've got APIs, you know, you may be going back into mainframe at some point, being able to see the whole picture, monitoring your APIs, your websites, and mobile all together is hugely, hugely important. Just for understanding the system as well, you know, understanding where all my APIs are, who I'm talking to, who's consuming me, that sort of thing. But you can also see, well, if I'm getting a problem, I can see it's because it's further downstream. Mobile, I often say mobile is always the victim, and usually it's API's fault. That's what I reckon. Understanding, You know, if you've got a problem, if you've got a crash or an issue, understanding if it's a particular device, you know. This is often one of the first questions I'll ask on an incident. Is it Android or iOS? Is it a particular version? Is it a version that I don't support anymore? Is it only happening on this version, or is it everything above that? I've seen a bunch of times where it's been, it's only on Samsung phones, yeah. But it helps you to narrow it down because it means that you can try and replicate it because it goes, right, okay, this is only happening on iPhone SE. Right, I can try and get an SE and try and test it on that to see what's going on. And as ever, this is a new addition, AI gubbins. Every tool and their dog these days is adding AI stuff in. And all the tools for analytics are just the same. AI stuff will attempt to predict and things. Can go wrong, can go badly. Certainly seen a system where we used to get an alert every Friday at like 2 a.m. all the time, constantly. And then after a couple of months, we stopped getting the alerts because it learned that the system went down at 2 a.m. So it was like, oh, that's normal. So you've got to be careful with that. And with your product analytics, think about what questions you want to answer. You know, how many users were affected by a crash or outage? How many times, how many payments might we have missed? You know, if we've got an outage for some reason, it can be important to say, you know, how many payments might we have missed? And this will all say how the sort of things that you want to actually track in your application. Another big one, you know, what's the user experience? You know, while they're experiencing an outage or a crash, what does the user see? You know, if the user's seeing it just falling back to their home screen, that's very different from the user sort of sitting there staring at a spinner. But usually, in the middle of a major incident, people want to know this thing. They want to understand what the user's actually seeing so they can control it. Because there could be reputational damage on the line, reputational risk, and a lot of other things. And this is especially important. Get these dashboards set up because if you get a call at 3 a.m., you want to be able to answer these things as quickly as possible without having to try and figure it out. So, begs the question, what's the best tool for the job? And as ever, it depends. It always depends. The easiest answer is whatever they've got. You know, if you're working with a client or you're working with a customer, what are they already using? Let's just use that to start with. If they're not using that, well, try and encourage something. Something is better than nothing. Crashlytics is free, easy. It's fine for most things. You can get by quite well with it. Some of the other tools, they have SaaS solutions. You can get trials, proof of concepts. Depending on the size and complexity of the application, having it integrate with their APIs, their web tools as well, can be very useful because you can get a big picture view of what's going on. But pricing is always going to be an issue. You know, as I say, Crashlytics is free, but other things have costs. But there's also SaaS on-prem. These can make it cheaper, and you just have to work through what they are. But yeah, there are an absolute boatload of choices. But you can see up here, Datadog, Dynatrace, New Relic are all sort of in that leaders, and then there's tons of different options. This was probably a couple of months ago, this one, so the landscape has probably changed a little bit from here, but yeah, tons of choices. So the last thing, you know, when should I do this? When should I think about analytics? The best place is when you started the project, because we all know how much of a pain it is to add it in later, but the second best time is now. You know, if you've got a project and you're not thought about analytics, you're not thought about how you're going to track this, get all your stats, well, start thinking about it now. You know, try and shift left, because it's going to be a lot easier to answer these questions now and get all this in place now than when you've gone live and people want to know these things, people want to understand all this. Shift left, build it early, make it extensible so that when it comes to it, somebody says, right, okay, I need to answer this question. You can go, oh, right, okay, it's just easy to start tracking that thing. So that's me. Any questions? Go on.
What are your thoughts on tools? I saw LogRocket on that graph
Yep.
here that I guess kind of scrape your screen a bit, and I've used it on previous projects, and it kind of showed what the user did on the screen, and you could anonymize certain bits.
Yeah, I think those sorts of things are really valuable. LogRocket's not one that I've personally used, but being able to see what a user's doing, where they've tapped, can be very useful, not only for incident management, crashes, those sorts of things, but also usability and user testing. You know, understanding where a user's focus is. You know, are they constantly touching on the bottom right of a button? You know, maybe that means that actually I need to move that button somehow. So if you can get that information, Hotjar, I think it is another sort of similar one. A lot of web tools do very similar things. So yeah, I think it's valuable.
With like product analytics, when would you start considering doing like custom stuff and just forgetting about like all those SaaS options?
I would probably always consider the SaaS options, because then if you wanted to try and do something custom, it's a whole other thing. And you know, if you've got a large complex application, then you've got tons of different things. You might be integrating APIs, you might be integrating web. There are some lighter weight solutions. Google Analytics is sort of built in with alongside Firebase, so you can get by quite well with that. Grafana and Prometheus are some other sort of relatively lightweight, customizable tools that you can do. Any more?
You kind of had developer tools, and then you had kind of more production or like customer related tools. How do you see them merging together? Like, how do you know if there's a failure for like payments or people not making purchases? How would you?
So I generally see sort of the product stuff as trying to answer different questions. You know, it's all about user behavior, customer behavior. You know, how are they moving through a journey? Are they falling over in a particular journey? Whereas on the developer side, I'm sort of more interested in what was a user doing before an issue. You know, how do I get the logs out? What do the logs look like? Where I think it's valuable to have some crossover is when you're trying to diagnose a problem. You know, what journey was going on. So I would always have essentially a generic analytics thing that that when I track an event, fires it off to my product analytics, but also fires it off to my application analytics, so that I have them tallied together. Because it could be product says, well, why are none of our users making a payment over 50 quid? And you can go, right, okay, well, I can see that any payment over £50 never goes through. 49 goes through. But then I can go, right, okay, are there any crashes that happen, particularly if they're around the same time, where users are, making payment of 50 quid? I can see they've crashed, and I can see, if I'm tracking whether or not it's a high value payment or something, I can see there's a crash there, and I can see what they were doing beforehand, and that might help me to replicate it. So having both information, I think, is really valuable.
How do you get buy-in from the team to start using analytics?
How do you get buy-in? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, do you mean the product team as the release team or the developer team?
Just the dev team. You made a comment that some devs go, I'll build what I'm told.
Yeah. So you have to get the buy-in, the fact that it's easier to do this now than later. If you've got a particular team that, you build it, you support it, being able to get them to say, well, it's going to help you in the long run when this goes wrong and somebody calls you up at 3 a.m., being able to understand these things. So if you've got a dev team that's going to support your application as well at the same time, that can be really, really valuable. They're going to get awkward questions, so helping them to understand that this is going to help to answer those awkward questions easier because you can just point to a graph or a dashboard or something, rather than them having to go and look through logs and try and dig through Splunk records and things like that. So trying to get that buy-in to say, this makes it easier. And then the other thing is being able to show them the whole picture. You know, things like New Relic and Dynatrace can give you a mesh so you can see, right, okay, a message comes into mobile and it goes to this API, which goes to this API and then goes to this and goes to this database, and then the response comes all the way back. That can be really useful to show the dev teams where they fit in, you know, being able to see where you fit into the wide infrastructure. You're not just, you might be a cog, but it's a big machine, you know, that you're helpful for. So I think that helps get that buy-in. I think, was there another question over?
So you mentioned there are ones which can record your screen.
Yep.
Does that have performance impacts on mobile apps?
Yeah, so you're always going to see some of that. But I think if you, depending on how you're tracking, it can change it. You know, potentially I've seen things where you can, if you've got contact with people, you can put debug versions on. You could put it into your test. So if you're seeing these things, and you know, because it's not just for production, you can get these in tests. So QAs are coming to you. You can give a QA a version where you're recording it, so you can see exactly what the QA is doing. But yeah, recording these things is going to always have some implications. But personally, I've not tried them on mobile, so I'm not sure how much of a problem it's going to be. Any from the Slido?
No, but I have.
Go on.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Where does analytics of this type fit in with things like A/B testing? Do the tools sort of cross over in any interesting ways?
Yeah, I mean, you could do, particularly your product analytics, you could do with your A/B testing, particularly if you track on your event, you can send a load of metadata with it to say, right, okay, you know, I'm using feature set A or I'm using feature set B, so you can understand, well, users going down journey A are more highly valued than users going down journey B. You know, they tend to get more retention, make bigger payments down this, so that can tell you. It's all about, you know, what question you're trying to answer, you know, and then work out what you need to do to answer that question. Cool.
One more question.
Go on.
How do you navigate user privacy and consent management with this sort of stuff? Is there a bright line between you can always collect these things because they have no personal identifiable information, and these things certainly should not be collected?
Yeah, you have to go back to the policies that Apple and Google put out to really look at, to say, well, are we collecting it for this information, for this reason? And they have a pretty good setting out what sort of things you can collect and why. Particularly, advertising is going to be a little funny one. In general, if you're collecting it for purposes of, you know, understanding crashes and things, you're generally all right with that. But you have to respect what the policies are saying. App tracking transparency, you know, you need to implement that. I've had apps get declined because that's not been implemented or hasn't been implemented properly. So, yeah, you have to look at your policies and work out, can we go down it? Are we using it for advertising? That sort of thing. Making sure you're not tracking personal information, obviously. You know, that's what I was saying, you know, you don't want to track every single keystroke. So you have to have some good reviews of what you're actually sending. Cool.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Great, thank you.